of its board of directors and our partner in this event today. He's a graduate of West Point and Princeton. He served in the Army before becoming an academic. He's written or edited about a dozen books. And really, there's a lot to learn from Andy Bacevich. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a round of applause for him to welcome him on. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I have to admit, I'm still trying to figure out where I fit in the promise of scintillating conversation. It's generally not my strong suit. But
you bring the smart, I'll try to bring the scintillating. I'm going to fail at that. That was a bad one. Let's start with this. We often hear the phrase new Cold War to describe the US-China relationship. Is that a good thing?
I think it's a terrible thing. Now, what are we? We're at least a generation apart in age. You don't even remember the Cold War.
I read about it.
I remembered it. I remember it, and I participated in it in many respects. And my recollection of the Cold War is Korea, not that I was there, Vietnam, I was there, nuclear arms race, the Cuban Missile Crisis, McCarthyism, the military-industrial complex, the imperial presidency. You know, we ended up coming out, I guess the outcome was favorable, but I think the damage done to our country in the course of the Cold War is tremendous. And therefore, I'm very wary about the notion that that's the path we're headed down. We need to look for other historical metaphors to guide us.
And do you have one? What would be a better way to think about US-China competition?
It has to begin, in my judgment, with looking for common interests. There are some. Certainly, we have a common interest in avoiding great power war, which in all likelihood could end up being nuclear war. We have a common interest in addressing what many people think is the existential challenge of climate change. To say that those ought to be priorities is not to dismiss other urgent issues, but I think you look for the things you can agree on and you build a relationship from that.
Now, you probably teach things such as the Thucydides trap, which, for those of you who don't know, I mean, when you have a hegemon and then a rising power, there's a certain inevitability to the two reaching a point of conflict. And that's another framework that often gets deployed to describe the US-China relationship. I'm assuming you think that's not a good framework.
Absolutely. And see, that's a framework that political scientists like. Political scientists believe in theories. They believe in using theories as a basis for policy. My training is in history. I think historians generally think that life is really complicated. The complications warn us against believing in easy solutions, but the complications also suggest that there may be other paths than the ones that the political scientists tend to focus on, and I apologize to all of the political scientists in this room.
Well, of course, the Thucydides trap comes from history as well, and Sparta. And
fair enough, but it's been adopted in our own day, I think, by the political scientists.
Now, to be clear, when I was talking about how there's bipartisan agreement in D.C. on getting tough on China, there are very good reasons to be worried about some of the things China does. And
Absolutely.
There are very good reasons to be tough on China on several aspects. I mean, if you look at what China is doing in Tibet, in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, with human rights, its policies in the South China Sea, Taiwan, these are all areas that are worrying. They're worrying, I think, for the United States. They're certainly worrying for actors in Asia. When you say and when you think about this relationship as getting too heated, what is the alternative to dealing with a country that is rising rapidly in strength and power, and that is doing things that are shaking up the world order.
First of all, I mean, the rise of China is real, but I think it's also in understanding the context in which policy is evolving, it's important to appreciate the fact that China has its own problems. And those problems, which I think are mostly economic, but could be domestic political as well, are themselves going to be a source of restraint. I'm from the Quincy Institute. We stand for restraint. We're not naive. We recognize that the U.S.-China relationship is fraught with risk and is enormously complex. There are no let the lion lie down with the lamb solutions to this. But I think we believe that applying the principle of restraint, emphasizing the importance of consistent dialogue can, over time, help us identify a path that can lead to something approximating peaceful coexistence. It ain't going to be easy. The entire relationship is fraught with tremendous risk. But I think our view is that the restraint is a place to begin to try to foster a dialogue that can yield positive results. Maybe it's restraint combined with wariness. Our eyes got to be open.
Coming back to, again, sort of policy towards China, another phrase that gets used a lot in this relationship and with heated rhetoric is escalatory spiral. And I mean, given your background as a historian and in the military, what are the dangers that you see in, if we are in an escalatory spiral with China, what are the dangers we should be aware of?
Well, the biggest danger is the possibility of a shooting war in the Asia-Pacific, whether over Taiwan or whether stemming from territorial disputes. The danger is a real one. I think we would be naive to deny that. What's the answer? I think the answer is dialogue based on a common understanding of common interests. I have no 5-point plan to bring peace to the Asia-Pacific, but I think the kind of rhetoric that we heard from Republican candidates at the debate last night, which assumes that there is no coexistence, that assumes that the relationship has to be contradictory, the assumption takes us down a path that is a very, very dangerous one.
Now, is it fair to say that in the last few weeks, maybe even months, there's been a little bit of a cooling down in rhetoric? Do you think that's a fair assessment? And if so, why do you think that's happening?
Well, so I live in Walpole, Massachusetts, which is a long way from Washington, D.C. So I don't know exactly what's driving that change, but the change does seem to be a real one. I can tell that even out there in Walpole. It could be, in part at least, that the Biden administration recognizes that it has its hands full with other crises. And so it's not the time to court a showdown with the People's Republic. We got problems in Ukraine. We got problems with Gaza, Israel. So perhaps it's time to take a more tempered approach to another part of the world. That's at least one possible explanation. It's also, the election season is upon us. And again, I'm not a political expert, but it appears to me that Mr. Biden, who wishes to win a second term, may have a difficult time doing that, and therefore it may not be time to court big trouble. I personally think, based on no political experience whatsoever, that if we stumble into another major war anytime in the near future, the result is going to be bad for American democracy. And therefore, the avoidance of war is always ought to be a foreign policy priority. But I think given the political sensitivities of the moment, it should be even more a political priority.
Now, California's Gavin Newsom just went to China, and it seemed like he was channeling some. No, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. It seemed like Governor Newsom was, able to still raise difficult issues when he met his Chinese.
Because I confessed that
No, yours is on.
Oh, I
Mine's
didn't
on.
pay any attention to his trip.
As we work on the mic, there you go. Okay, I'm going to use this one. In his visit, he was able to, I think, approach, he traveled far and wide, but was able to sort of approach discussions with the Chinese less from a sort of a necessarily antagonistic position, but a little bit more sort of nuance and humility as well. And I guess maybe to linger on the word humility, is it your sense that with America's sort of relative decline in the last 20 years or so since the Iraq War, that because of that relative decline, I'm not saying decline in absolute terms, relative decline given China's rise, given the rise of other countries in the global south, do you think that changes how America should approach the way it sort of grapples with China's rise?
Oh, unquestionably. And I think that in some quarters of our establishment, the American establishment, that necessity, the necessity of humility, is beginning to sink in. But on the other hand, the resistance to that prospect, the resistance to the notion that we must be number one and we will be number one from now until eternity, that notion is still very, very powerful. And sadly, then, taking a tough stand with China offers itself as a way of doing that, as a way of demonstrating that, yeah, we're still number one. We ain't going to be pushed around. And that whole attitude, I think, is fraught with danger.
Well, I think that's an excellent framework for us to have several other discussions here today. We have panels on the economy. We have representatives from Congress coming in as well to discuss the U.S. policymakers' approach. We will be looking at the role of the Global South, which often gets forgotten that, as you have America and China locked in competition, what does it mean for other big countries around the world? India, Nigeria, Indonesia, countries that see both the United States and China as crucial trading partners. This is different from the Cold War. Another way in which it's different in that 40 years ago, all of these other countries didn't actually necessarily see the Soviet Union as vital to its interests. So there are many other really interesting discussions coming up, and you'll see me again in a bit. But for now, I'd like to thank you, Andy Bacevich.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next, please welcome to the stage JP Morgan Chair of Global Research Joyce Chang and Commissioner on the U.S.-China Economic and Security